What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Jam with Jock. Today I'm going to share with you 3 of my favorite free plugins that I use in almost every one of my tracks. By following along with me today, you're going to learn how to get the most out of these free plugins. And of course, I'll leave a link to all of these free plugins down in the description below. Let's go ahead and get straight into it. The first plugin that we're going to be looking at today is a plugin called Vinyl by iZotope. What Vinyl does is it emulates what your sound would sound like on a vinyl record in certain eras. So I usually like to put it on sometimes the master bus and sometimes just individual tracks. I found that I use it most on pads and keys. That way you can lo-fi and also select the type of error that you want to try and replicate. So at the top here, like I said, we have the errors that we can choose from. So the errors 2000 effectively makes no changes. It slightly detunes it a little bit, but as we go down in errors, the frequencies start rolling off. So we have the 80s. So you can hear how lo-fi it gets the lower the years get. I usually leave the RPM on 45, so it actually doesn't change the pitch of the track. It's just the higher it is, the more that you hear the crackle, and the lower it is, the less you hear it. Then we've got my favorite button on the entire plugin, and this is a spin down effect. So I often like to do this at the end of a track or in a transition, and I always struggle to try and create this effect. So to get the whole track to work in this effect, I'm just going to put that same plugin on my master bus. And that's an awesome effect that I love to use in a lot of my tracks. If I wanted to record this actual effect in, then we would just create an audio track, we'd resample, and then we'd go ahead, hit record, and then we have an audio version of that spin down effect. If you wanted to make it even more lo-fi, there's just a button that does exactly that. Now this wear mode is quite interesting because as a record in real life gets played more and more, the more high frequencies it starts to lose. So you can actually emulate how much this record is actually worn out. So it also creates actually a lot of distortion too. So what we'll do, you'll notice as the high frequencies roll off, we start to lose a lot of the sound of the track. So I like to drive the input up. And you get a really distorted sound that I think is a fantastic replication of a real life record player that has been worn out. If you really want to create that vintage sound, a lot of synths, especially the Juno, has an electrical sound to it, a buzzing sound. So if you wanted to do this ever so slightly, I think that would go a long way in creating that old sound. But just be careful, you obviously don't want to have this up too loud. This dust knob just controls how much dust is on the actual record, so the higher it is, the more crackle there is. I always have the scratch all the way down, and that just replicates how much scratches is on the actual record. So you'll hear when I turn it up. It's a certain effect that I think you really need to have a specific purpose for it to be turned on at all. So yeah, I always have it turned all the way off. The warp mode just creates a more detuned sound the higher it is. So if I'm maybe creating some pads that I want to try and sound like they're replicated from an analog machine, a lot of those analog synths didn't have the best pitch in them. A lot of them sounded slightly detuned a lot of the time. So if I was going for that kind of sound, I'd have this on ever so slightly. I wouldn't want it all the way up. About 25% of the way there, you start to get that subtle detuning like a real analog synth. The great thing is you can actually automate all of these knobs. So if I wanted to have maybe the dust crackling up a bit more in the chorus to create a bit of depth and movement, then I can automate that more in the chorus. Just like if I wanted to have a certain part of the track with the pad detuned and then not detuned at all, I can automate that warp. So that's a really cool function to be able to do. For a free plugin, it just has a lot of capabilities that you can implement in your tracks today. My only downside to this is the crackle that it has constantly. So I get if you have mechanical or electrical turned up, you're always going to hear the buzzing. But if I want to have a little bit of dust on the one track, I'm always going to hear that when I'm working on my track. So for me, I just often turn it off when I'm working on something else. But for me, that's the only downside to it. It's just that constant crackle that you hear when making a track. Next up, we have an amazing free plugin that gives extreme life to any sound that you put it on. If you haven't watched my latest upload where I talk about giving life to your drums, then I'll just leave it right up here where you guys can go and have a look. This is a free way to do it, but in the last video, I talk about some other ways that I go about it. This plugin I'm talking about is Fresh Air, and it's by Slate Digital. I often like having these on the drum group, and it has quite a strong effect. So I always try and be quite subtle with it. It has some amazing presets if you wanted to go for the mix bus polish or the sparkle. And then it's even great for vocals and stuff too. I often start with the presets and then dial it into my desired taste. But we'll just, if I'm putting it on the drum group, it's great that you have both mid and high presence so you can really dial in the sound that you want. So if I'm having this on, say, a shaker loop or maybe some hi-hats, I'll focus more on the high frequencies. And if I want a snare to maybe have a bit more presence and lift to it, then I'll add some of this mid-air. So right now I've only got it on 15 and 25%, so super subtle. So let's have a listen in context in the mix to see what it's doing. I'll have it off to start off with. On. So as you can hear, it has quite a strong effect, like I said. So I felt like even when I took it down from 25 to 20%, it sounded a lot better. I felt like at 25%, it was making the high frequencies quite harsh. So very important on the drum group not to overdo it. But I think if you're working with individual tracks, you can have it dialed up a little bit more. Now, as I'm listening to the drums, I want to add a bit more presence in the mid-range to that snare. Now, I could just dial it in on the group, but then I'll have the other mid-range frequencies impacted as well. So if I just group my two snares and I'll throw the Fresh Air straight onto them, I can now start working on those snares individually. Let's listen in context with the mix. Have it off to start. It's really an unbelievable difference having it off and on. For a free plugin, it's really incredible the sound that it can create. Next up, we have the TAL Chorus, which is actually my go-to chorus plugin. Despite me owning a couple of UAD choruses, I still find myself using this free TAL Chorus all the time. The reason being is it's a replica of the Juno 106 chorus, which is without a doubt the most famous chorus in music. So what this effect does is it adds some modulation and stereo width to any track that you put it on. And it just does such a great job of thickening up your sound to just make it a lot more strong and dense in the mix. My personal favorite way to use this plugin is on pads and synth leads. So we'll go back and listen to the other project with some pads, but first we'll actually try it on this guitar that I've got. I'll turn it off. So you can hear how much it's modulating it. It's detuning it, and it's also making it a lot more wide in the mix too. So I often like to be quite subtle with it by turning down either the dry wet or the volume. You also have a couple of different modes that you can do too. So the number one mode is the most gentle of them, and it just provides some subtle modulation. When you have number 2 on, it really adds a notable sense of depth and movement, making it sound fuller and immersive in the mix. And then you're actually able to turn on the 1 and 2 at the same time. So this is the most intense chorus modulation effect that you can have on with the settings. Let's go ahead and listen to it on a pad. So just throwing it on the default setting, I haven't touched anything, off. Turning it on, and it's almost adds a bit of a phasing effect too. It's just a really great sound when you want to try and replicate some of that vintage 80s synthwave sounds. Let's have a listen to it in context with the mix. I'll just turn it down a bit because, like I said, it does add quite a lot of volume. Off. On. If you have headphones on, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, but how much stereo width did it add? If you want to make a track that has a full stereo mix, then you definitely need to have some chorus on, and this is a fantastic way to do it for free. So there you have it, guys. There's 3 incredible plugins for free that I guarantee you'll have in your constant rotation of plugins. Hopefully by following along with me in the video, you've learned when and when not to use them, and also how to use them to get the most out of it. If you had any questions about these plugins in particular, then please don't be shy to drop them down below. If you want to see more of this content, I'd really appreciate if you could hit that like and subscribe button. That way I'll know that you guys want to see more plugin focused content. Once again, thank you so much for staying to the end of the video. I really appreciate it. And if you wanted to go ahead and keep watching my stuff, then I'll just put my latest upload right up there. Until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.